Welcome back to Hunt Creative. Today we're going to be making a modular log palisade from dollar store bits, mostly coffee stirrers and bamboo skewers. Here you can see I'm measuring out a bunch of bamboo skewers to lengths that I'm going to be using to help assemble the palisade. And I'm using a coffee stir stick as a bit of a straight edge to help me get them all lined up and marked. And I'm going to just use a standard side snip and clip them into pieces. And I'm going to clip a lot of them into pieces. Basically what I want to do is I want to use the bamboo skewers to represent rough hewn logs stood up on end to form a palisade or a log wall. Something that you would find in a border fort or a border town, something like that. And I want them to be modular, so I'm going to make them in 4-inch and 2-inch widths. Long lengths of straight walls will be composed of 4-inch lengths, and then the corners will be 2 inches on a side. So that'll give me a nice round number. I'm going to be using coffee stir sticks as rough hewn planks for the walkways and to bind the logs together on the inside. And I'm also going to be using some craft matchsticks that I found at my dollar store for corbels and trusses. Here I am, I'm just cutting up all of these bamboo skewers into the lengths that I need so that I can start assembly with everything pre-cut. One after another. It's a good time to put on some tunes or a movie in the background, do some Netflixing, listen to audiobooks, stream your favorite YouTube crafting channels. I do a variety of stuff. And here I'm using those same side snips on some coffee stir sticks. I'm going to measure those to length as well. I use the grid on my cutting mat heavily for this project to determine lengths and to mark my cuts. And then I use the side snips to just snip the pieces I want into the sizes I need. I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone that if you enjoy these videos and the content that I bring out, subscribing, liking, and sharing the videos will help me continue to be able to produce assembly videos for other game crafts. I also have a Patreon page, although I don't have a lot there yet. My subscriber count doesn't really warrant any Patreon products as yet. You can find links to those in my description below. So what I do is I just snip the rounded end off the coffee stirrer to give kind of a straightened edge, and then I measure these sticks to length using the grid on my cutting mat, as you can see. There's a scrap piece to line them up nicely. And then I just mark where I want the cuts to be. And I'm not too fussy. I mean, I want to mark them as accurately as I can, and I want to try and cut them as accurately as I can, but I'm not going to sweat a millimeter off here or a millimeter off there. This is for game crafting. I want it to be playable and I want it to look nice, but I'm not going to be fussing over to the millimeter model accuracy. I like my terrain to suggest and inspire imagination, not to prescribe it or limit it to what can be seen. And oftentimes I'll use theater of the mind along with the model terrain to enhance and add to the scene for my players. These little 1-inch pieces that I'm making are going to be the planks of my catwalks along the tops of the palisade. They're also going to be used in some places for additional structural support. The longer pieces in the top of the screen are actually going to be support pieces holding the logs together. And I'm actually going to build them a little bit backwards from how a palisade actually would be built. And here you'll see how I'm going to assemble them. So I've got pieces cut with the point still on them and pieces cut with blunt ends, and I'm going to alternate the blunt end pieces and the skewer pointy pieces to create the crenellations at the top of the palisade. And basically I'm lining all of these pieces up on my cutting mat with interspersed spacing of blunt ends and pointed ends until I reach a width of 4 inches. And I'm not too worried about getting them all lined up smoothly at the tops and bottom as yet. Right here, I'm more concerned about achieving the width of section that I'm looking for. I want it to be 4 inches. And I'm getting pretty close here. Flatten down the skewers and get them all lined up. And then I'll use a scrap coffee stirrer to line up the bottoms relatively straight with the markings on my cut mat. And there you can see that I've got them lined up within the 4 inches that I want. And I'm just using that extra piece of skewer to keep the end piece from rolling away. And there's a prototype piece that I made. I'm just showing how I want to line up the cross members that I'm going to glue in. And then here I'm just lining a very precise bead of glue across each and every one of these skewers. I want contact with every piece. And then I'm lining up a section of coffee stirrer to be a cross member to hold all of these skewers together in the formation that I want. And I'm just checking my prototype to make sure that they're lined up the way I want them to. And now I'm going to start creating a gate with an opening mechanism for one section of the wall. So I'm going to start the same way. I'm going to have some pointed bits and some blunt end bits. And basically what I'm looking for is a 1-inch wide section on either side of a 2-inch opening. So it's a 10-foot wide gate. Big enough to drive a small cart through. And it'll be 10 feet tall, so it'll be high enough for horses to ride through, average size horses. So here I've got the two sides of the gate lined up. And then I'm going to check for size and make sure that I've got the pieces I need to go across the top of the gate. And it turns out that I need to cut these to a custom length. So I'm going to cut several more. And this is just kind of the adaptive planning process of this kind of project. I'm designing and building on the fly, and sometimes I need to make alterations or cut custom pieces to fit. And that's how the crafting mind works. And so here I've got some blunt end pieces again, and I'm going to space out some pointy bits and continue the crenellation style theme along the top of the palisade wall. And I'm just cutting a little bit off of these to make sure that the crenellations have some differentiation. And I want to make sure that I cut enough. And I'm just using those side snips again. And just a tip when you're using side snips like these, if you hold both sides of the cut with your fingers, being careful not to pinch any of your skin in between the cutters, it prevents the snipped off piece from flying off in all directions. And here I'm just aiming the cut piece downwards so that it'll smack into my cutting mat instead of flying across the room. And I'll just line them up with similar spacing to the other sections of wall that I have. I'm just modifying that spacing a little bit to make sure that I cover the full 4 inches while maintaining a crenellated look. Had to cut a couple more shorter pieces here just to maintain that spacing correctly. And aim that little offcut down into the mat so that it doesn't fly across the room. I'm just fiddling around a little bit to make sure that I got the spacing the way I want it to be. I want it to be a full 4 inches wide, so I'm going to make sure that I have enough pieces in there to make that up. And then here I'm just cutting a little 2-inch helper tool to help me line up the bottom of those upper sections. With the cut lines on my map, there's my hair and my glasses. And it looks like I need just one more piece in there. Yep, that looks better. And I'll put that little 2-inch helper piece down at the bottom to help maintain the spacing and relative squareness of the gateway. That's looking pretty good. Oh, maybe one more piece in there. I want everything to be lined up as squarely and as cleanly as I can, so that when I glue it all together, it slides in and modules nicely with the rest of the pieces. If everything is right around 4 inches wide, then everything will line up nicely and form a nice square foot. I'm not worried too much about 100% cleanliness here. A little bit of rough-hewness to it or handmadeness to it is okay. A little bit of character is not bad, but I do want to make sure that the pieces all fit together nicely. And here I'm just adding the lower supports. These supports are important because I'm going to add a bridging piece across them, and that'll create a little slot into which I can slide a piece of pop stick or craft stick, and then each of these sections will key together using that slotted piece. And that's what makes it modular. Then I can assemble them in all kinds of different configurations. Here I'm just custom cutting those bridge pieces. At the bottom of the screen you can see some walkways that I glued together off screen. And you can see the gate that I made to fill the opening in the gateway piece as well. And I'm using an extended piece of bamboo skewer on the gate to key it in so that it can be removed when desired for ease of play. And because it's going to pivot on that skewer, it means that it can be raised and lowered during play as well. It's a nice touch, little articulated gateway. I am not going to make a winding crank or anything for this, and the reason for that is that it's going to be extremely fiddly to use during play, and I prefer ease of play over that sort of realism in my on-table modeling. And there you can see I have some sections of popsicle stick that I'm setting beside each piece where they can key together. And there's a prototype piece with walkway and trusses and support post in place. And here I am just using dots of craft glue with pre-cut matchsticks to act as trusses or corbels or joists for the walkway. A little bit of added realism in presentation and engineering. And also practical, because once that glue dries, those walkways are going to be much more stable for the added support. I'm just taking my time to line them up nicely here. So they rest on that bottom cross piece and they angle out to the outer edge of the walkway in kind of a angled cantilever situation. Looks really good when it's painted up. Now here I'm going to be playing a little bit with the gate. There's my triangular shaped base for it. I'm going to be gluing the gate wall to that base with my hot glue. Make sure I get the facing correct. I want the smooth side on the straight part of the base and all the functioning interior on the triangular wedge part of the base so that it matches all the rest of the pieces that I've made. And I'm just using food box cardboard for the bases, and I'll flock them with sand and glue, and I'll paint them up, and they'll look really good. Here I'm just waiting for that hot glue to dry, and I'm giving it a little bit of torque to make sure it's nice and upright at 90 degrees as much as I can, and a little more hot glue on the inside to hold that down. Once that hot glue firms up, then I'm going to start working on the gate assembly and walkway so that the gateway can be removed and so that the walkway can be utilized by game models and so that the gateway can be raised and lowered all while playing in game. So you can see that I've kind of engineered the gateway to sit just proud of those support members. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bulk out a little bit of the planking to sit around each side of that gate pivot skewer, and that way the gate can be keyed in and out and raised and lowered. It'll rotate within that pocket. So I'm just using little blocks of coffee stir stick to bulk out an appropriate opening where the skewer moves freely. I'm trying to do so in such a way that the added pieces don't interfere with the seating of the gate itself. Just kind of thinking and building as I go, checking for the amount of clearance that I need so that that skewer moves freely when it's in place. Using relative measurements, I'm holding the skewer piece up to what I need to cover and measuring and marking it with a pencil so that it is exactly the right size for what I need. And yes, I'm using hot glue because it's fast. But that's okay. There's a trade-off. I understand. Craft glue or white glue would be stronger in the end, but it would take a lot longer and there'd be a lot more waiting for pieces to dry on the table while I was mucking around with the engineering. And honestly, I wanted to get this piece done in a little over 2 days. I think 2 days of crafting, including dry time for paint and stuff. And just the design in place thing here is ensuring that everything lines up the way I want it to and that the clearances are correct. Wow, I don't know what happened there. Must have checked my phone to make sure the camera was on and caused that little blip in the filming. Sorry for that, guys. I'm human. Most of the time. So here I'm just making the top part of the key channel for that rotating skewer for the gateway, bulking out the volume by adding a few pieces on top of each other, just to make sure that there is space for that skewer to ride freely. I'm using a matchstick to scrape out any extra hot glue squeeze that might get in the way. Looks like 3 layers of stir stick was what I needed to create sufficient free airspace for that skewer to rotate and move around. And there we go. We can see that the gateway sits neatly in the pocket I've created for it, and that the skewer moves freely. The gate can lift and lower. And it's got a little side-to-side play, which is fine. And here I'm just creating some extra coffee stir stick planks to glue in place and hold that skewer from popping out of that pocket. So no glue on the skewer, just on the planks on either side, allows it to ride freely in that channel. Get those lined up nicely. So that one works. Oh, another camera shift there. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one side of the pivot skewer longer than the other. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to slide the gateway to one side and pop that skewer out of the short end, and that way the gate can be removed or popped back into place as I see fit for gameplay. It's just a little convenience feature. I'm just double checking the measurements in my engineering here, and then you're going to see me snap off the end of that skewer. And then double check the fit. And on this side, I'm only going to add one plank to hold the skewer in place, and that's going to give me the clearance to move it back and forth so that I can slide it to one side and pop it out, or I can pop it back in, kind of like a sliding door on a cabinet where one slot is longer than the other, or deeper than the other slot, right? You can see me popping it in and out here. Pretty happy with that. And now I'm going to add the walkway atop the gate mechanism. And this walkway is going to be a little bit higher than the other walkways on the other sections, but that's okay. I'm just doing some trimming off camera here because my brain has decided that doing this over the cutting mat on camera is not important. It's kind of weird when I get into flow state and I'm in the middle of this crafting, my brain kind of shuts out what's going on around me sometimes. And so I don't think that on-camera-ness is top of mind when I'm trying to figure out the engineering behind some of this stuff. And so sometimes I'll hold it close to my chest while I'm deep in concentration. Like intellectually, I know that I need to be on the cutting mat, center of the cutting mat, but here I am, deep in thought, brain distracted, not quite there. And then I'll get a little epiphany and it'll be like, oh yeah, camera. And I'll move it up closer to the camera where the camera wants to be. And then I'll get back into flow and thinking about stuff. Here I'm just lining up the walkway again, just the same as the others. Off camera again. So you can see what it looks like. And each step, I'm just double checking the gate, testing the lift and fall, making sure I can get it in and out the way I want to. And I'm going to add some matchstick trusses to hold this walkway up, although they won't be over the actual gate itself. They'll be off to the side there, where the keys go. That's okay. I'm fairly certain that when setting up an actual log palisade, the engineers have to do some in-the-moment engineering of this type as well to make sure everything works the way it's supposed to and functions properly. And because we're not building a timber frame structure or anything like that, I'm also certain that log palisades don't quite have the same microscopic tolerances requirements that timber framing would need. Plus it's just crafting, so as long as it looks good on the table and works, I'll be happy. Here I just added a couple of anchoring blocks at the bottom of the truss. I've got some pre-cut matchsticks that I'm laying in place, and what I do is I dip the off end in the dollop of glue at the bottom, and then I flip it around so that there's glue at both ends of this truss. See me dipping it there, and then I flip it, and then I add it in that way. And here I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to line it up as vertically as I can so that it's believable for engineering purposes. And I thought I might put one in the middle there, a shorter one, but then I decided not to because it was going to be right in the way. That's the brain, right? Get into the flow state. So now I'm going to paint everything. And what I've done here is I've mixed up a half and half matte black, coffee bean brown, and it's about 1 part paint and 5 parts water, mixed up really well to create kind of a thin, dark brown wash. I'm going to wash all the sections of these logs with this dark brown wash, except for the parts where the cuts would be, so the very tops of the blunt ends, and then the sharpened points of the crenellations at the top are going to remain natural wood color to represent that these are reasonably fresh cut and that bare showing wood is much lighter than the barky aged texture. And then here I have a milk chocolate burnt sienna sort of look, and I'm going to do a reasonably heavy overbrush over top of the wash, but only on the logs, not on the ground. And that's going to add some depth of color to the wooden barky texture on the outside. I'm just using a dollar store craft brush. I'm going to hit the inside and the outside, but I'm going to leave those natural ends the way they are because I don't want those to change. And I'm not going to be too fussy about getting the entirety of the inside of these with this reddish brown because the playability of the inside is going to be limited. If it's set up in a fort configuration, you'll see it, but you won't see it in very close detail. So I'm just going to hint at it along the tops of the walkways and whatnot. Looking for about 80% coverage, not too fussy. I want some of that dark to be showing through, but I also want some of the reddish brown to be showing through. And you can see there's a little bit of variation in the amount of dark showing from the wash. And that's okay. Once I get finished overbrushing and dry brushing this, it's all going to blend together pretty nicely. And then here I'm using a camel color light brown tan, and I'm going to dry brush all of the exposed surfaces of these logs as well. And again, I'm looking for about 50 to 60% coverage. I want some of the previous colors to show through, but I also want quite a bit of this dry brush overbrush to appear as well. And this is just giving me that worn in place, weathered sort of look. I'll let some of this color get onto the raw ends of the wood to unify the colors a little bit more. I'll dry brush the planks and the stairway that I built out of popsicle stir sticks. I only built one corner with a staircase on it. Same system as before, I just lined everything up on my cutting mat and used the markings on the cutting mat to get things spaced out the way I wanted to. It looks a little bit ramshackle and I'm not too worried about that. Looking really good. Once this is all dry brushed, I'll give you some beauty shots of it in place with some models for scale. You can see the food box cardboard bottom. I didn't really paint that. Adding a little bit of dry brush to the sanded gravelly base. Make sure that pops a little bit, looks natural. And here we have it with a couple of trolley trolls for scale and some models standing on the catwalk, some actual character models from my game. You can see the keys slotting in, holding the pieces together. There's the gate in its raised position from the inside. I just used a little piece of jewelry chain for that. And the loop on the end of the jewelry chain hooks onto one of the crenellations, and if I lift that up and drop it, there's the gate closed. Thanks for joining me. Come back in 2 weeks and we'll have another look at some terrain for your desktop gaming.